Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Mathcast podcast. Today we are joined by Mr. Clifford and Ms. Des, who will join us to discuss math as a whole and how they got into math. So, how did you get into math? Were you always this passionate about math, or when did this passion really start?
I've always had a passion for maths. I found school quite difficult. English wasn't my first language, but my parents both really valued the importance of mental maths, and we would do times tables races in every single car journey, and I think that just made maths something that I could sort of excel at a young age. But it was then at secondary school when I think my ability in maths became my passion, and I credit that entirely to my maths teacher, Mr. Ali, who was so passionate. He made sure I was never complacent. He challenged me from day one. And I think his enthusiasm for the subject was so infectious, and I think that's where sort of my passion really started.
So when I was at school, I think a similar sort of experience to you, apart from obviously English was my first language. I was pretty good at maths, particularly when I was in year 7 and year 8, and I think I enjoyed just getting loads of questions right, which is the same as a lot of kids. They just like to get lots of things right, and as the maths got more and more difficult, I got worse and worse at it because I didn't really understand the essence of what was going on. And what I actually found was that a little bit later on, when I started doing things like tutoring other students, that was when I started to actually really understand what was going on. So I guess that's part of where my passion for maths comes from, but also my passion for teaching is just an understanding of, if you really get it, then you can start to think about explaining it to someone else. I think also, as I became a maths teacher, I started to explore a little bit more outside of just doing questions and doing problems, and discover a little bit more about the actual world of maths, which has made me even more passionate about the subject.
I feel like that's a good point, and I also want you to elaborate a little bit on what you mean of the real math, and like how that's different from the school math, where you said that was really easy and where you could get through a lot of questions where you get them correct. But how's that different from the real math, and what did you learn when you were tutoring like other students?
That's definitely the $1 million question, isn't it? Is how do we transfer what we learn in the classroom to what we actually need in real life? And I think our answer to when is maths useful, why is this useful, what's the point in doing this, I think Ms. Des and I would both probably say a similar sort of thing, in the sense that a lot of the things that we do in school seem a little bit useless because they are quite basic and they are quite straightforward, and actually maths only starts to become useful when you get into some really very complicated stuff. And in terms of usefulness in real life, the maths that is going on is so tricky and so difficult that so many people can't access it. It makes it look like it's not at all useful, the stuff we learn in school. So for example, when we're learning things like percentages, fractions, shapes, we're very much just learning the fundamentals and learning the basics and basically learning the alphabet of maths, in order so that one day maybe we can actually start to use it for something which is a little bit more tricky. In another sense, the things that we do in maths, they're a great proxy for showing whether you're good at problem solving and whether you're good at thinking in certain ways and whether you're good at communicating your ideas and being analytical and being able to put yourself in a situation where you actually have to figure things out for yourself. So whilst it might not seem very useful to be able to work out how many sweets Hannah has, or the area of this trapezium, actually by being good at maths in a schooly sense, you're demonstrating that you're able to be a problem solver, which is the most useful thing in the world, is to be able to solve problems, because that's all life is, just moving from day to day trying to figure out problems.
That's a great point, and I feel like it applies to many other subjects as well, where different subjects teach you like different things, but there's no straightforward link until you really think about it. But I feel like that point is a little bit different for math, because I feel like in an English lesson, no one would really ask you why we're dissecting every single word Shakespeare says, or in science, why we're learning about every single thing in the human body. But in math, a lot of the times people ask, when will I ever use this in real life? And that question, I feel like it occurs a lot more often in math than in any other subject. And I'm trying to understand why, but it's a lot more often in math.
That's a really interesting question about why it happens so often in maths, and I think part of it is cultural. I think people grow up hearing adults say things like, I'm no good at maths, I never need to use maths, I haven't done maths since I was at school, and that's fine, I've been successful and I never need to do it. Whereas no one ever says those things about English, no one ever boasts about how bad they are at reading, and no one ever says things like, oh, I'm really, really rubbish at writing. But the number of times that we as teachers have to encounter parents say things like, oh, I'm no good at maths, so they'll probably be no good at maths as well. I think that kind of thing is just so much more acceptable. When you hear people say things like that, it then sort of becomes acceptable to then ask, well, what's the point of this?
I think also there's sort of a lack of appreciation that sort of without maths we don't have engineering, we don't have design, there's no construction, no banking, no data, and the list goes on. And I think if there was sort of a bit more realisation just how maths really is everywhere, I think people will be more just prepared to sort of embrace it and the challenges that maths sort of brings. But yeah, I think the jump from the maths that we do at school to the maths that is actually very useful is huge. But it is all about sort of that learning how to think critically, even if you don't go into those fields and evaluate information, which I think is quite different from other subjects.
Yeah, math definitely offers a new perspective to different things, and I want to come back to where we sort of started the start, where you started with math. And when someone would have asked you when you were at school and stuff, because right now we're at the age where people would ask you, what do you want to be, what do you want to be? When you were at that age and someone would have asked you what you wanted to be, would a math teacher be on that list? And what was it at the time? What were your interests?
So no, definitely not. We didn't really talk about sort of the possibilities that lay ahead of us when we were at school, but I knew I loved maths and I knew I had to pursue it at university. But I hated speaking in front of other people. I would go bright red when my teacher asked me a question. So the idea of having a career where I was just standing in front of 30 children every hour seemed terrifying, and I just felt I didn't have the confidence for it. And even at university, I just studied maths at university because I really enjoyed it. And there was a programme at my university where they wanted graduates to come and spend one afternoon a week at a secondary school to sort of inspire young people. And I think we were paid £200 a month to do it. So I honestly just did it for the money. But that was where I think I really sort of started to see that I loved the school setting, and I loved talking about maths, and I loved trying to teach it in a way that made sense to these young and very disengaged people. But before then, absolutely not. The idea of being a maths teacher never even crossed my mind.
When I was young, everyone used to say to me, oh, you should be a teacher, you should be a teacher, you should be a teacher. And it honestly took me until my mid-20s before I actually acknowledged that maybe that was quite a good idea. I was always very anti the idea of being a teacher. I guess I was always very interested in sports, so I did a lot of sports coaching when I was younger. Whilst I liked maths and I was good at it, I wasn't necessarily passionate about it at that stage. I think one thing Miss Des mentioned was about just enjoyment, and I think when you are at that age where you are a teenager or even in your early 20s and you're starting to think, okay, what is it I actually want to do? It's just thinking about, well, what do you like doing? What do you enjoy doing? And I think for both of us, it was something that we were good at, that we realised actually someone will pay us to do this thing. So we thought, okay, well why not? And it's absolutely fine to have absolutely no idea what you want to do, but just narrowing it down into certain things that you might want to do. I remember doing one of those careers quizzes when I was probably about your age, Hannah, maybe a little bit older, where I answered a whole bunch of questions, and it then generated what job you should do when you're older, and it gave me two options. One was being a helicopter pilot, and one was working in a garden centre. So it's definitely, I'm not sure what the moral of that story is. Maybe I'm in the wrong profession, but it's definitely the case that at that stage, it's okay to just have your options open and just think about the things that you're passionate about, think about the things that you love, and don't commit to anything too quickly.
I want to come back to the point where you said that everyone said that you should be a math teacher. I feel like that also really puts you away, because when everyone says that you should be this, you like tend to go a different direction completely, because like when the world forces you to do something, you want to go the completely different direction.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'll just clarify on one point though. No one was saying you should be a maths teacher. People were just saying you should be a teacher. And I think, like, with reflection now, I can see that it's the teaching that I love, not necessarily the subject. Whilst I do love the subject, I love teaching more. And I think you're absolutely right. When you are a teenager and someone says you should do this, you should do this, you very often will want to do the complete opposite, and that was basically my teenage years.
It's probably where the whole helicopter and the gardening came in. Just to finish off, I want to ask you, if you were to summarize math or teaching into one sentence, what would it be?
Okay, that's definitely a really hard question. Maybe if we just have a little thought experiment where we ask people to imagine a world where no one was good at maths, no one was able to solve any problems, no one was able to figure anything out. Just imagine what that world would be like, and then allow me to then reflect on my position as a maths teacher. I'm someone that in some cases enables and in other cases drags people towards starting to feel the same way I do about maths and start to begin to love maths and love solving problems, and how different the world looks as a result of people who are good at maths.
It's a good way to think about it, to counter, like to flip the table. If it weren't, then like that.
I think for me, I love those moments of when am I ever going to use this in life, miss? Because that for me is an opportunity to stop and just talk about how maths really is everywhere, and I love it.
I agree. These are the moments where you really get to because I feel like for the first time that probably happened to you, you were probably thinking about it yourself, or you didn't know the answer to like that question, and it's a great thing, like I'm pretty sure you said before, where you learn all these skills like in an indirect way, and then they link to like your skills in real life and how you acquire, like how these skills can help you further on in your journey. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and hopefully now you understand that math isn't necessarily a useful subject, but it is something that you can acquire a lot of skills which are useful for. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed.